She lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone, yet few really knew her. Most people saw her as the quiet woman who worked at the corner bookstore. She arrived early, opened the shop, greeted customers with a soft smile, and went home before sunset. Her days were calm and predictable, almost invisible. She didn't talk much, didn't attend town events, and rarely let anyone into her world. But inside, she carried a secret that had once been her whole life. She was a pianist, one who had once filled concert halls with music that could make strangers cry. Her fingers used to dance across keys as if they had their own soul. But that was before everything changed, before she decided to leave the stage behind and live quietly among people who didn't know her past. Sometimes, when she closed the shop early, she would take a walk to the small park behind the old library. There was a rusted bench under a tree where she liked to sit and listen. Children laughed, leaves rustled, and the distant hum of the city created a soft background. In those moments, she could almost hear the faint echo of a piano somewhere far away, as if her own music was calling her back. But she never followed that sound. She'd simply close her eyes, take a slow breath, and whisper to herself, "Not again." People around town thought she was just shy, maybe lonely. They never guessed she had once stood beneath stage lights facing thousands of eyes. They didn't know she had once dreamed of performing around the world. Now she preferred silence. Silence didn't ask questions. Silence didn't hurt. The only place that still reminded her of her old life was the local community center. Every few months they hosted music nights, small concerts where local musicians played for free. She would always sit in the back row wearing her same gray coat, hands folded in her lap. No one paid her much attention. She came quietly and left quietly. But every time someone played the piano, her eyes followed their hands. She'd notice each mistake, each missed emotion, each small beauty that others might overlook. Once, after a young boy stumbled through a simple melody, she caught herself whispering the correct notes under her breath. When she realized she was doing it, she stopped, feeling her throat tighten. Her heart raced as she looked down, afraid someone had noticed. No one had. She smiled faintly, almost sadly, then looked away. Her small apartment was filled with books, not music. There was no piano anymore. She had sold it years ago. The space where it used to stand was now occupied by a bookshelf full of old records she never played. Sometimes she'd run her fingers along their dusty covers, reading the titles like memories she couldn't touch. One of them had her own picture on it, a much younger version of herself sitting at a grand piano, eyes closed in the middle of a performance. She quickly turned it over and placed it face down. She couldn't bear to look. There were days when she wondered if she had made the right choice by walking away. She had told herself for years that it was better this way, safer. But when she saw others playing, whether it was children practicing at the park or street musicians downtown, something inside her twisted painfully. It wasn't jealousy. It was longing, a kind of deep ache that comes from missing a part of yourself you once believed you could live without. Her life carried on quietly. She was kind to everyone, helpful, gentle. People liked her, but no one really knew her. She liked it that way. It was easier to live without explaining the past. One rainy evening, she closed the shop early because the streets were empty. The sound of raindrops against the window made her pause. She leaned against the glass, watching the world blur into gray streaks of water. Something about the rhythm of the rain reminded her of a melody she used to play long ago. Soft, slow, full of sadness. Without realizing it, her fingers began moving slightly, tracing the air as if pressing invisible keys. She smiled to herself, then quickly pulled her hands back and shook her head. The next day, she passed by a flyer on a notice board outside the grocery store. It read, "Charity Music Night open to all musicians next Saturday." She stopped for a second, reading the words again and again. She almost laughed at the idea. Her on stage again? That world felt so far away it was almost like it had belonged to someone else. Still, something about that flyer stayed in her mind. When she went to bed that night, she found herself dreaming of a piano, of soft lights, of a sound that felt like home. The following weekend arrived quickly. She didn't plan to go, but when evening came, she found herself standing outside the community hall anyway. She told herself she was just there to listen, like always. The hall was warm and crowded, full of chatter and excitement. Children ran between rows of chairs, families sat together, and musicians tuned their instruments nervously on stage. She took her usual seat in the back, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. The first few performances were cheerful. Local students, a small choir, a man playing guitar. The piano stood at the center of the stage, waiting. Every time someone sat at it, her heart gave a small flutter, but their music always ended too soon, leaving her with an empty feeling. A few people around her recognized her as the quiet woman from the bookstore. They nodded politely, and she nodded back. But no one tried to talk to her. That was how she liked it. Midway through the night, the main performer, a well-known local pianist, was announced. The host spoke with energy, praising the player's dedication to the event. But minutes later, confusion spread through the crowd. The pianist hadn't arrived. Someone whispered that he had fallen ill and wouldn't make it. The host looked nervous, scanning the audience. "Is there anyone here who knows how to play?" he asked half-jokingly through the microphone. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Then, unexpectedly, one of the volunteers, an older man who often saw her at these events, turned and said softly, "What about her?" He pointed toward the back. "She comes to every concert. I bet she can play." She froze. Her stomach tightened as every eye slowly turned toward her. She shook her head quickly, waving her hands slightly. "Oh no," she murmured. "I can't, really." But the crowd had already started to murmur with curiosity. The host smiled kindly and said, "If you know even a little, please, help us fill the time." No pressure at all. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. For a moment she wanted to stand up and leave, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way people were smiling encouragingly. Or maybe it was something deeper, something she had buried long ago, now pushing to the surface. She looked at the piano sitting there, bathed in soft light. It almost seemed to be waiting for her. She took a deep breath. Her fingers tingled, a strange mixture of fear and longing. Slowly she rose from her seat. The room went quiet as she walked down the aisle, her footsteps echoing faintly. The host whispered, "Take your time," and handed her the microphone, but she shook her head. She didn't need to speak. When she reached the piano, she placed her hands gently on the keys but didn't play yet. Her reflection shone faintly on the black surface, and she saw not the quiet woman from the bookstore, but the pianist she had once been, still there beneath the years of silence. Her chest tightened with emotion. Memories rushed through her. Endless hours of practice, the thrill of performing, the face of her mentor smiling proudly, and then the night it had all fallen apart. Her breath caught in her throat. She closed her eyes. The hall faded away. It was just her and the piano again. The first note she pressed was soft, trembling slightly, like the voice of someone learning to speak after years of silence. But it carried truth. Her fingers followed one after another, building a melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. The crowd leaned forward, surprised by the richness of the sound. In that instant, she wasn't the quiet woman from the bookstore anymore. She was something more, something reborn. The hall was completely silent, as if everyone was holding their breath. The woman sat at the piano, her fingers resting gently on the keys, unsure if she was doing the right thing. For a moment, she almost stood up and walked away. But something deep inside her whispered, "Play." Her first few notes were soft and uncertain, like tiny raindrops on glass. They wavered for a second, then began to flow more steadily. It had been years since she'd last played in front of anyone, but her hand seemed to remember what her heart had tried so hard to forget. The melody began to form slowly, filling the room with a gentle warmth. At first, the audience didn't move. They were unsure what to expect from this quiet woman who had come out of nowhere. But as she continued, something changed. The music began to grow, tender at first, then powerful, full of hidden emotion. It wasn't a rehearsed piece. It was something that seemed to be made right there in the moment. Her notes told a story words could never capture, of loss, silence, and the courage to begin again. Each sound seemed to come from her soul. The high notes sparkled like light breaking through clouds, while the deep tones rolled like distant thunder. Some people in the audience closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. A child in the front row leaned against his mother, whispering, "She's really good." His mother just nodded, too moved to speak. Her hands moved faster now. It wasn't perfect, a few notes slipped, a few rhythms wavered, but that only made it more human, more real. It was raw emotion, not performance, and somehow that honesty made it even more beautiful. For her, time had stopped. She wasn't in the hall anymore. She was somewhere else, in a memory, standing on another stage years ago. She could almost see the face of her mentor in the front row, the one who had first believed in her. He used to tell her music doesn't come from your hands. It comes from your heart. The keys are only the language. That voice echoed in her mind as she played. Her heart swelled with every note, and a strange calm came over her. For the first time in years, she felt free. All the pain she had kept locked away seemed to melt through the music. Every strike of a key released a piece of the weight she had carried for so long. When the final note hung in the air, she let her hands fall to her lap. The sound faded slowly like the last breath of a dream. For a few long seconds, the hall remained still. Then came the applause, and not loud at first, but soft and rising like a wave. It grew and grew until it filled the room. People stood clapping, cheering, and smiling. Some wiped their eyes. The woman looked around, startled. She hadn't expected anything like that. Her cheeks flushed, and she gave a small, almost shy nod. She didn't bow or speak. She simply stood and walked away from the piano. The applause followed her until she reached the side of the stage. The host met her there, eyes wide in disbelief. "That was—" he began, but she only smiled gently and said, "It's been a long time." As she stepped down from the stage, people reached out to shake her hand or thank her. Some asked her name, but she avoided giving it. She didn't want attention. All she wanted was peace, and tonight somehow she had found a small piece of it. When she left the hall, the night air was cool against her face. The stars were bright, scattered like scattered notes on a dark sky. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and began walking home. Every step felt lighter. Her heart was still racing, but it was a good kind of racing, the kind that comes when something inside you wakes up after a long sleep. That night, she couldn't sleep. The sound of the piano kept replaying in her mind. It wasn't perfect, but it had been real. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling both exhausted and alive. The small apartment that had always felt quiet and heavy suddenly seemed different, warmer, almost welcoming. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was hiding. The next morning, when she went to work, her coworkers noticed something different about her. She smiled more. Her movements were lighter, almost graceful. When a customer asked how she was, she said, "I'm doing okay," and for once she meant it. Later that day, the older volunteer from the concert stopped by the store. He had a kind face and carried a small paper bag with 2 cups of tea. "Mind if I sit for a bit?" he asked. She nodded, and they sat near the window, watching the rain. "I didn't know you could play like that," he said after a while. She looked down at her hands. "I used to," she said softly. He took a sip of tea, studying her quietly. "Well, you still can. You made everyone there silent, even the children. That doesn't happen often." She gave a small laugh. "I didn't plan to play, it just happened. Maybe it was meant to," he said simply. They didn't talk much after that, just sat in silence. But something about that moment stayed with her. For the rest of the day, her mind kept wandering back to what he'd said. Maybe it was meant to. That evening, when she got home, she stood in front of her bookshelf again. Her eyes fell on the old record, the one with her picture on it. For years she had kept it turned face down, but now she picked it up and brushed away the dust. Her younger self stared back at her, confident, alive, full of hope. It hurt to look at it, but it also gave her strength. She found herself whispering, "Maybe it's time." The next day, she visited the small music store near the town square. She hadn't stepped inside in years. The familiar smell of polished wood and old sheet music filled the air. The owner, an elderly man, recognized her immediately, even though she had changed. His eyes lit up. "It's been a long time," he said softly. "I wondered what happened to you." She smiled faintly. "Life happened," he chuckled. "Life always does. Still, it's good to see you." She walked around the store, running her fingers over the tops of the pianos lined up against the wall. Each one seemed to call to her in a different way. Finally, she stopped in front of a small upright piano tucked in the corner. The keys were a little worn, the wood slightly faded, but when she pressed a few notes, the sound was pure and honest. She bought it that day. Not a grand piano, not the kind you'd find on a concert stage, and just a simple one, enough to fill her apartment with music again. That evening, when the piano was delivered, she sat down in front of it for a long time before touching a single key. She ran her fingers across the smooth surface. remembering the feeling of belonging she once had. Then with a deep breath she began to play. The melody that filled her room was gentle, full of life. She didn't play for anyone else, only for herself. The walls that had once held silence now echoed with sound. Not perfect, but honest. She smiled through tears she didn't try to stop. As the days passed, she played every evening after work. Sometimes she practiced old pieces, sometimes she made up new ones. Music returned to her life like sunlight breaking through clouds. People in the apartment building began to notice. When they passed her door, they'd slow down to listen. Some left small notes under her door saying how much they enjoyed hearing her play. She never signed her replies, just wrote short thank you messages and smiled quietly. News of her performance at the charity concert started to spread through the town. Someone had recorded a short clip and posted it online. Within days, it was being shared again and again. People described her as the mysterious woman who played like she was telling a story. She didn't even know about it at first. When a customer at the bookstore showed her the video on their phone, she was speechless. The sound was raw, full of emotion. She watched herself sitting there at the piano, eyes closed, lost in the music. For a long time, she couldn't look away. Something inside her stirred again. Not the desire for fame, but the quiet understanding that maybe her music still had a purpose. She didn't need to be on big stages or under bright lights. Maybe her gift could simply live in small moments, reaching people who needed to hear it. That night, she looked out her window at the dark sky. The same stars glittered above her, steady and endless. She whispered softly, "Maybe this is the beginning again." And for the first time in a long time, her heart truly believed it. The sound of the piano slowly became a part of her life again, like an old friend returning home after years of silence. Each evening, when she came back from work, she would make herself a cup of tea, open the window just a little, and sit down at the piano. The room would fill with soft, living notes that seemed to change the air itself. It started quietly. The neighbors upstairs would pause for a moment when they heard her playing. A mother from the next building told her son to stop and listen because someone down there plays beautifully. A few people even stood by the street at night, hearing the faint music floating out of her window. They didn't know who it was. They just called her the woman with the piano. She didn't mind remaining unseen. She had lived quietly for so long that it felt natural. What mattered now wasn't being noticed. It was feeling alive again. Each piece she played seemed to open a door inside her. Sometimes she played the songs she used to perform years ago, and other times she made up her own, letting her emotions guide her hands. When she played, memories returned, not in full pictures but in fragments. The smell of backstage air, the warmth of stage lights, the way her mentor used to place a hand on her shoulder before a concert and say, "Trust the music." Those memories didn't hurt as much anymore. They reminded her of who she was, not what she had lost. One Sunday morning, as she was sweeping the floor of the bookstore, a young girl came in with a shy smile. She was about 10, holding a folded paper in her hand. "Are you the one who plays the piano at night?" the girl asked. The woman froze for a second, unsure what to say. Then she smiled. "Maybe," she replied softly. The girl's eyes lit up. "My grandma lives across the street. She listens every night. She says your music makes her sleep better." She wanted to say thank you. The girl placed the folded paper on the counter and ran off before she could reply. She opened the paper slowly. Inside was a simple drawing of a window with golden light and a person sitting at a piano. Underneath, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Your music makes hearts calm." Her eyes watered as she held the little note. It was the first time in years someone had said her music mattered. She placed the drawing on her wall above the piano when she went home that night. Over the next few weeks, more people began to notice her music. A few left kind notes under her door, some left small flowers, and one even slipped a thank you card through her mail slot that said, "You bring peace to our nights." It wasn't fame, it wasn't a stage, but it was something far more meaningful. Meanwhile, the video from the charity concert continued to spread online. It reached far beyond the small town. People in other cities began commenting about how her playing had moved them. Many said it reminded them of someone they had lost or of dreams they once had. Some called her the anonymous pianist with a soul. At first, she didn't pay attention to any of it. She didn't even use social media. But one evening, the older volunteer from the concert stopped by again with his phone in his hand. "You should see this," he said with a smile. He showed her the video, the one where she had played that night. Millions of views, thousands of comments. She stared at it in disbelief. It didn't even feel real. People were writing things like, "I felt her pain through the keys, and this woman plays like she's healing the world." Her hands trembled slightly as she watched herself on the screen. She remembered how nervous she had been that night, how unsure. She never imagined it would reach so many hearts. She looked at the man and said quietly, "I didn't do it for this." "I know," he said gently. "That's why it matters." That night, as she sat at her piano, she couldn't stop thinking about all those people who had listened. Somewhere out there, people she'd never met had felt her emotions as if they were their own. That thought filled her with warmth, but also with responsibility. Maybe, she thought, music still has a purpose in my life. The next week, she was invited by the community center to perform again, this time as a special guest. The organizer said people had been asking about the mysterious pianist from the last concert. At first, she hesitated. Part of her still feared the stage, the lights, the attention. But another part, the stronger part, told her to accept. So she did. The night of the performance, the hall was full again. Many had come just to see her. She felt nervous as she stepped on stage, but when her fingers touched the keys, that fear disappeared. The music took over. This time, she didn't just play, she shared herself completely. She played a piece she had written over the past few weeks, something born from her silence and rediscovery. It began soft and fragile, like a person learning to walk again, and slowly grew into something powerful, hopeful, and full of light. The audience sat still, their eyes glistening as they listened. When the final note faded, the applause came like thunder. She bowed her head, smiling through tears she didn't hide. After the concert, people lined up to thank her. Some shared how her playing had touched their lives. One woman said, "Your music reminded me of who I was before I stopped believing in myself." Another whispered, "It gave me courage to start again." She realized then that what she was doing wasn't just about music. It was about healing, not only herself but others too. Word of her story reached a local journalist who wanted to write about her. He came to the bookstore one afternoon with a notebook and recorder, but she hesitated when he asked for details about her past. She didn't want the story to be about tragedy or fame. She wanted it to be about hope, so she told him, "Just say I'm someone who found her way back to music after losing it for a long time." The article was published the following week with the headline, "The Covert Pianist Who Played Her Way Back to Life." It was simple but powerful. People loved it. Some even traveled to the small town just to hear her play at the community center, or outside on summer evenings when she performed small pieces for charity. She began teaching children too, not as a formal teacher, but as a friend. A few young students from the town came to her apartment after school, eager to learn. She taught them not only how to play notes, but how to feel them. She told them, "Music isn't about perfection. It's about truth. Even a broken note can tell a story if it comes from your heart." The children adored her. They called her Miss Piano. Their laughter filled her small apartment, mixing with the sound of clumsy yet joyful melodies. One evening after the students left, she sat alone in front of her piano and thought about how far she had come. From silence and hiding to laughter and music again. She whispered softly to herself, "You did it. You came back." Her phone buzzed with another message, an invitation from a city concert hall. Someone from the charity event had sent her video to a music foundation that supported independent artists. They wanted her to perform at their next event, this time in front of a much larger audience. The idea made her heart race, not with fear, but with excitement. She didn't need the fame, and she just wanted to share something real. That night, as she played softly under the glow of her lamp, she thought about how strange life could be. Years of silence, and then suddenly everything returning. She smiled through tears as her fingers glided across the keys. Her music had changed. It wasn't about showing skill anymore. It was about showing life, the quiet, the pain, the joy, and everything in between. It was no longer something she performed. It was something she lived. And somewhere between the notes, she realized she had finally found what she had lost long ago. Not her fame, not her title, but her heart. The once covert pianist was no longer hiding. The invitation to perform at the city concert hall rested on her table for days. Each time she looked at it, her heart fluttered with both excitement and fear. The letter was polite, warm, and full of praise. They had seen the video of her performance and wanted her to play at a special evening event meant to honor artists who had overcome challenges. For many, it would have been an easy yes. But for her, it wasn't. That stage, the bright lights, the sound of applause, those were things she had walked away from long ago. The last time she stood on a grand stage, she had left in tears. The memory still lived in the corners of her heart like a shadow. She sat by her window one night staring at the invitation, listening to the faint hum of the city below. The piano stood silently in the corner, waiting. After a long pause, she whispered to herself, "Maybe this time, I won't run." The following morning, she wrote back to accept. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet preparation. Every evening, she practiced for hours. Her neighbors could hear her playing longer than usual, sometimes past midnight. The melodies she played were full of emotion, soft in some moments, fierce in others. She was not only practicing for a concert, she was preparing to face her past. One afternoon, she took the train to the city to visit the concert hall. It was large and beautiful, with tall glass walls and golden lights that reflected off the marble floors. As she stood in the empty hall looking at the grand piano on stage, a wave of memories hit her. She could see her younger self there, confident, smiling, full of dreams. She could also see the night it all ended. Years ago, during a performance, her mentor, the man who had guided her since she was a child, had been in the audience. It was supposed to be her biggest concert yet, but just minutes before she began, she had received the news that he had collapsed backstage. They tried to keep it from her, but she found out. Her hands shook through the performance, and when she finally walked off the stage, he was gone. That night had broken her. The piano, the applause, the spotlight, all of it reminded her of what she had lost. So she left it all behind. She told herself she could live without music, but deep down she knew she couldn't. Standing in that same kind of hall again, she felt both fear and peace. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and placed her hands gently on the piano lid. "I'll play for you," she whispered softly, thinking of her mentor. Not for the audience, not for the world, just for you. The night of the concert came faster than she expected. The hall was full. People had come not just to hear music, but to see the mysterious woman from the viral video, the Covert Pianist, as they called her online. Reporters were waiting by the entrance, cameras flashing. She wore a simple dark dress, her hair tied neatly, no jewelry, no showy makeup. She didn't want to look like a star. She just wanted to feel like herself. Backstage, she sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. The sound of the audience murmuring reached her ears, mixed with the soft tuning of instruments. Her heart was beating hard, but there was also a deep calm inside her. When her name was announced, she walked out slowly. The lights were warm and bright. For a moment, the sight of the crowd made her freeze, rows and rows of faces waiting for her. But then she looked down at the piano and the fear faded. She began to play. The first note was clear and gentle. It hung in the air like a whisper before growing into something fuller, deeper, more alive. Every sound that followed carried pieces of her story. The loneliness, the loss, the rediscovery, the quiet courage that had brought her here again. The music filled the hall with emotion so thick that people could almost feel it in their chests. Some in the audience closed their eyes. Others leaned forward without realizing it. Every note seemed to say something words couldn't. Halfway through the piece, her eyes grew moist, but she didn't stop. Her fingers kept moving, faster and stronger, pouring out everything she had carried for years. It was as if she was speaking to her mentor through the music, telling him she was okay now, that she had found her way back. When the last note faded into silence, she didn't move right away. Her hands rested on the keys, trembling slightly. The hall was silent for a few seconds, a silence so deep it felt sacred. Then the applause came. It wasn't just loud. It was full of warmth, like the sound of 1,000 hearts beating together. People stood up clapping, some even wiping their eyes. She stood and bowed, her smile small but real. For the first time, the applause didn't make her nervous. It didn't feel like a wall between her and the audience anymore. It felt like connection. After the concert, the organizers invited her to speak. She hesitated, but then stepped to the microphone. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I stopped playing for a long time," she said softly. "I thought music had left me when I lost someone very dear. But what I've learned is that music doesn't leave you. It waits and quietly, patiently, until you're ready to listen again. Tonight I played not to be heard, but to remember. Thank you for listening." The audience gave another round of applause, even louder this time. After the show, backstage was full of people wanting to meet her, musicians, journalists, fans. She answered kindly, though she still avoided questions about her past. But one young man, a reporter, asked something that made her pause. "Who taught you to play with such emotion?" She smiled faintly. "Someone who believed that music could heal." He was right. That night, as she returned to her small town by train, the city lights blurred outside the window. She leaned her head against the glass and watched them fade into darkness. A feeling of peace settled inside her. She had done it. She had faced the very thing she once ran from. When she reached home, she placed the concert program on her piano. It wasn't about success or recognition anymore. It was about closure and something even deeper: gratitude. Over the next few days, messages poured in from people all over the world. Letters, emails, and comments. Some said her music had helped them through hard times. Others said it had given them courage to return to their own dreams. She read every message slowly, tears filling her eyes. One letter stood out. It was from a woman who wrote, "I used to play the violin before my husband passed away. I couldn't touch it for years. But after hearing you play, I picked it up again. Thank you for reminding me that love doesn't end. It just changes." She folded the letter and placed it beside the drawing the little girl had once given her. Both were reminders that her music now had a life of its own, one that reached hearts she would never even meet. The same volunteer who had first asked her to play at the charity event visited her again. They shared tea at the bookstore as usual. He smiled quietly and said, "You know, I think your mentor would be proud." She looked out the window, her eyes soft. "I hope so," she said. "Maybe he heard me." He nodded. "I think he did." And so did the world. That night she sat at her piano again, but instead of practicing, she played slowly, freely, without thinking. She didn't need a reason anymore. The music was enough. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at home. Not just in her apartment, not just in her town, but within herself. The woman who had once been a shadow in the back row was now standing in her own light. And though she never sought fame or attention, she had become something far greater. A reminder of what it means to fall, to heal, and to rise again through something as pure as music. The days that followed her city concert were unlike anything she had experienced in years. People in town greeted her with quiet smiles and words of encouragement, while letters and messages from strangers arrived daily. Some were heartfelt notes, others simple drawings or small gifts. Each one reminded her that music had a life beyond her hands, beyond the walls of her small apartment, reaching hearts she would never see. She spent mornings in the bookstore, arranging shelves and greeting customers with her gentle smile. But her thoughts often wandered to the piano waiting in her living room. By afternoon, she would close the shop and walk home, anticipation buzzing quietly in her chest. She wasn't playing for fame nor for recognition. She was playing because it made her feel alive. Each note seemed to carry a small piece of her heart into the world. One evening, a letter arrived that would change the way she thought about her music forever. It was from a school in a nearby city. They had heard about her performances through an online article and wanted to invite her to teach a workshop for young musicians. At first, she hesitated. The thought of traveling, standing in front of strangers and guiding children she had never met felt overwhelming. But she opened the envelope and read the words again. "Your story and your music could inspire the next generation. We would be honored if you shared them." She thought of the little girl who had once left the simple drawing at her bookstore. She remembered how that small gesture had touched her heart. Now she realized she had a chance to do the same for others, to show them that even after loss or fear, it was possible to find one's voice again. So she accepted the invitation. The workshop was held in a sunlit music room filled with bright faces and nervous hands. The children ranged in age from 7 to 14, each carrying an instrument or a notebook for music theory. At first they were shy, unsure what to expect from the quiet woman who had arrived almost unnoticed. She smiled gently, introduced herself simply, and asked them to tell her about their favorite songs. Listening to them, she remembered her own beginnings, sitting in a tiny room with an old piano, dreaming of filling concert halls. She encouraged the children to play from their hearts rather than just their fingers. "It's not about being perfect," she told them. "It's about expressing what you feel, even if it doesn't sound like someone else thinks it should." By the end of the workshop, the room was alive with laughter, clumsy melodies, and shy applause. A young boy with curly hair looked at her with wide eyes and said, "I never thought I could play something that made me feel happy and sad at the same time. Thank you." She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Music is magic like that," she whispered. "It can carry your heart even when words fail." Returning home, she reflected on how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been a shadow in the back row of a community hall, listening quietly to others. Now she was standing in front of children, guiding them, inspiring them. She realized that sharing her gift didn't diminish it. It expanded it. Each person she touched added another layer of meaning to her music. Meanwhile, her performances continued to draw attention. Small towns, music foundations, and charity events all invited her to play. She chose only a few, always keeping it personal, never overwhelming herself. Each concert was intimate, each note deliberate. She didn't want crowds for the sake of crowds. She wanted connection. At one such performance in a town far from home, she noticed an older man sitting alone near the front. He looked familiar, but she couldn't place him. After the concert, he approached her quietly and said, "I once knew your mentor. He spoke of you often, saying you had a gift that could touch souls." Her heart skipped a beat. She thought of him, the man who had guided her, believed in her, and left a hole in her life when he passed. "I hope I did him justice," she said softly. "You did," he replied. "And more. You reminded me that the music never dies. It lives through those who have the courage to play again." Her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, she felt that the past was not a weight she carried, but a part of her story that gave her strength. She had survived, not only through her own talent, but through resilience, and now she could share that resilience with others. Back home, she continued her quiet routines, but with a new sense of purpose. The piano in her living room became a center of life rather than a reminder of what she had lost. People came to visit, neighbors, students, friends she had made through music. Sometimes she would play while they listened silently. Other times she would teach them a chord or two, watching as their faces lit up with discovery. Her story began to spread more widely. Articles, social media posts, and small interviews described her as a pianist who had vanished and returned, not for fame, but for healing. She never sought attention, but she didn't hide anymore either. She realized that sharing her story could encourage others to pursue their passions, to overcome fear, and to find courage in the face of loss. One quiet evening, she sat at her piano, the room glowing with warm lamplight. She thought about the journey she had taken, the long years of silence, the first tentative notes in the back row, the charity concert that had changed everything, and the workshops that had allowed her to touch other lives. She realized that all of it had led to this moment, a life where music was no longer a burden but a gift freely given. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from a music academy in another country, inviting her to perform in a benefit concert. She smiled as she read it. She didn't feel the panic she would have once felt. Instead, she felt excitement and calm. She had found balance. She had found courage. That night, she played until the moon hung high above the city. The music was soft, reflective, and full of emotion. Each note was a piece of her story, a bridge between her past and her present. When she finished, she didn't feel empty. She felt complete. The little things now mattered as much as the big stages. A child learning their first chord, a note of gratitude from a stranger, the quiet satisfaction of expressing herself fully. All of it added meaning to her life. Music was no longer a performance. It was a living, breathing part of her being. Her journey had inspired people quietly at first, then more broadly. Stories circulated of a woman who had left everything behind and returned not for recognition, but for truth. People shared their own experiences. Stories of giving up, losing hope, and finding it again through creativity, courage, or simply listening.